Hey everyone, in this video, we're finally talking about the Hirelings. Yes! So this is a long-awaited video, and you'll understand why as we go through, because the Hirelings are a little bit of a complex system, and it's the first thing that's been introduced to Root that's kind of like the way other board games do expansions, where you add complexity on top of the existing system, not just a new faction that you could swap out, but the game still functions the same. In this game, now, not only are we going to be doing all of these complex faction interactions, but we're going to have a whole set of hireling cards and associated pieces that are going to go with these cards that are going to be interacting with the map on top of what we're already doing. I just want to say right off the bat, I don't yet have the Marauder expansion or the Hirelings expansions. So I have printed off the final cards, and I'm just going to be using substitutes. So I'm going to use the Eerie Dynasty's warrior or the Marquise de Cat warrior as substitutes for the warrior for the Forest Patrol or the Last Dynasties. These hirelings will have their own warrior pieces that look a little bit similar to both of the official warriors, or the faction warriors, I should say, but essentially they function the same way. They're just going to have a little bit of a cosmetic difference. Now, before we get into everything, let's talk about what the hirelings are and what they do. Well, if you've ever played a 2-player game of Root or a 3-player game of Root, you might have noticed some issues with the game itself. That's because the game is really designed to be played by 4 people. So 4 people are going to occupy these 12 clearings, and they're going to attack each other and drag each other down to the point where the winner is going to be the one that can break out of that interesting gridlock. But at 3 players, it can be really hard for 2 opponents to bring down a runaway leader because, there's just not enough stuff on the map to use, and maybe one of the factions is not really good at policing. So the game can be a little bit lopsided at 2 and 3 players. Not just that, but the map can feel very sparse. It can feel very empty, especially if the Marquise de Cat isn't in play. So Leader Games decided to give us a new system that can solve both of these problems. So the hirelings are going to add stuff to the map. And that stuff comes in the form usually of warriors, but it could be pawns or just special abilities and stuff. And they give the players an extra arm with which to punch a leader, so to speak. And I think it's a really interesting system. And the more I play with it, the more interesting it becomes. But there's a lot to go through. As you can see, there are 13 hireling cards, and they're all double-sided. So to keep this video on point, we're only going to talk about the hirelings that come in the Marauder Expansion box. Every hireling is based on an existing faction. So for example, the Riverfolk Flotilla, that's a hard one to say, is based on the Riverfolk Company. And the Flame Bears are based on the Lord of the Hundreds. And there are a few that aren't based on any faction. They're the Pink Hirelings. As you can see, the popular band is a Weasel or Stoat. That's not based on a faction. However, all of the hirelings that are based on a faction, for example, you've got this Corvid Spies, they will not be compatible with the faction they're based on. So if ever you're playing a game with the Warm Sun Prophets, you will not have the Lizard Cult appear in that game as well. So that means that the pieces won't get confused for each other. That's why it's totally fine for me to use a Marquise de Cat warrior and then just pretend it's the Forest Patrol, because it's impossible that you'll have both the Marquise de Cat and the Forest Patrol in the same game. So we're going to take all these and put them aside, and we'll talk about them in a Hirelings Part 2 video. For now, let's get into how to think about the hirelings. They are sort of like mercenary bands that are going to start populating the map right away upon setup. Okay? And as the game goes on, different players are going to take control of the hirelings and command them to take certain actions. You still have to think of them as almost their entire faction of their own, right? So if you do a battle as one of the hirelings and they remove a token or a building, the player who controls the hireling doesn't get victory points for it. And if you have a special ability, let's say I have Brutal Tactics crafted, and then one of the hirelings that I'm controlling is taking a battle on my behalf, I can't then use my crafted improvements, because crafted improvements, hand cards, and things like that belong to you, the faction, the player, and the hirelings are their own entity. And that's going to come into play a lot with these rules questions that I'm going to get into. But let's start the game right away with the setup of the hirelings. The first step in the advanced setup, and I'll put a video link here. You're going to choose the map, and then you're going to set the clearings up, then choose the deck, and then you would set up the landmarks. We're not going to do any of the landmarks for this video, but then before you deal out the hand cards, right, the 5 cards for advanced setup, and before you deal out the faction cards to do the draft, you're going to deal out 3 hireling cards, right? So you're not going to know which factions are playable. You're not going to know your hand card. This keeps it as even and objective as possible. You're always going to play with 3 hirelings. So we'll just take these 3, and we'll shuffle them around, and we'll deal out, let's say, these 3. So they all get dealt out. We've got the last dynasty, which is of course based on the Eyrie dynasties, the Spring Uprising, which is based on the Woodland Alliance, and we've got the Forest Patrol that is based on the Marquise de Cat. And now, depending on the player number, we're going to demote a certain number of them. So if we were playing a 2-player game, you would leave them all promoted. So promoted is just the main side. But as you can see, I've already chosen the factions. Just normally you wouldn't have done this at that point, but bear with me. So we're playing a 3-player game. So that means you demote 1 of the hirelings at random. So blah, 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 randomly choose, and we're going to demote this one. So now Spring Uprising transforms into Rabbit Scouts. And you see this little D in the bottom corner? This signifies that it's now demoted. That doesn't mean it's weaker. The difference between promoted hirelings and demoted hirelings is the D, but also promoted hirelings like these 2 are going to tend to have more pieces on the map that are going to contest you for rule, or they're going to be able to battle in different ways and affect the map generally, versus the demoted hirelings are kind of like a crafted improvement. They're kind of like having a special power that doesn't necessarily have pieces on the map, right? So for a 3-player game, you would demote 1. In a 4-player game, you would demote 2. There we go. And then in a 5 or 6-player game, you would demote all of them, okay? I don't even necessarily recommend playing with hirelings at 5 and 6 players, or even 4, just because Root is already a really well-designed tight game at 4. The hirelings primarily help you out with the 2 and 3-player count games. So we're going to go back to our setup for 3 players, where we have 2 promoted, 1 demoted. Okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to set up the hirelings in reverse turn order. So in this 3-player game, you'd figure out who's going to be first in turn order, second in turn order, and third in turn order. The last turn order player is going to choose one of the hirelings and set it up according to the instructions. So they're probably going to choose this one. So if you look at this card, we're not going to look at the actions that it can take. We're just looking at the setup instructions right now. If it has setup instructions, it'll be in italics in red text at the very top. So this one says setup. Place 5 Dynasty warriors in a clearing on the map edge. Okay, so they're not going to be able to control the hireling that they're setting up. They're really just deciding where it goes. Whether or not they ever even get to play it depends on how the game unfolds. So of course they're going to look a little different. I'm using normal Eyrie warriors, and they are going to go here. Why not? That's fine. It's on the map edge. So all 5 of the hireling warriors for that faction or that hireling are going to be set up right here. And keep in mind, this is not a homeland. Okay, so later when we're doing the actual advanced setup draft and setup, you could still choose this clearing as your homeland because hirelings don't have homelands. Okay. Then the next player in turn order, meaning in this case, the second player, would take another hireling, they'll choose this one, And the setup instructions for this says, setup, place a patrol warrior in each clearing. So it sets up kind of similar to the Marquise de Cat. So you're going to take all of these little cat warriors, and you're going to put one in each clearing. And I really like this hireling a lot because having one warrior in each clearing really makes the map feel busy. And it's going to contest you for rule in different areas, so it's not that easy to just move in, rule, and build. And the charismatic Eerie leader can battle something right away, and the warlord can't just oppress the entire map very easily. And then we'll move on. Then the first person in turn order in a 3-player game gets to set up the last hireling. But if we see, this demoted hireling and most demoted hirelings don't actually have any setup. So they don't have any choice to do. They're just going to put it right back, and then that's it for the hireling setup. Then you're going to take these 3 tetromino looking pieces, and you're going to put them on the score track. Okay, yours, if you're holding the final Hirelings expansion, they're not going to look exactly like this. This was actually a custom designed by a friend of mine on Discord. Shout out to Totgeboren. Thank you for these. Yours, the final version, are actually based on his design, and they're going to be very easy. They'll have numbers 4, 8, and 12 written on them because you're going to set them up on the 4 slot of the victory point track, the 8 slot, and the 12 slot. And their position here means that the first person to reach that point value is going to take control of a hireling of their choice. Okay? And then you're just going to have some control markers, and that's going to help you figure out how many turns you're going to have the hireling for. I don't have these control markers. I'll show you a picture of it, but I'm just using some random coins that I've been collecting. So you're just going to have 12 coins, and that's going to help you do count down the turns, because when you get a hireling, you're going to have it for a determined amount of turns before passing it on. Okay. Then you would complete this hireling setup and move on to the hand draft, and then doing the normal advanced setup where you would choose your faction and then set it up on the map. Okay? In this case, I've already decided that we're going to play a game with the Riverfolk Company, Lizard Cult, and Underground Duchy. And just to keep the map a little bit more clean, we're not going to be putting too many pieces onto the map. It's just for demonstration purposes. Okay, now that we've done the setup, and I'm not going to set up the Lizard Cult, it's just going to make the board too busy, we start the game. So the factions are going to start taking their turns, and they're going to be scoring points like normal, just playing the normal game. However, we already have to talk about rule. So you notice that in this clearing, we have 1 Duchy warrior and 1 Forest Patrol warrior. Remember, it's not a cat, it's a Forest Patrol. And right off the bat, who rules this clearing? Well, the hirelings that are currently uncontrolled rule the clearings on their own. So all of these clearings where there's only a Forest Patrol warrior, they're all ruled by the Forest Patrol. They can't do anything, but it basically makes it harder for the players to rule at the start of the game. So in this clearing where there's 1 and 2 mole warriors, the Underground Duchy rules this clearing. But in this clearing, the Duchy does not rule, even though they're the only faction with faction pieces. So they would actually need to move an extra warrior in here if they wanted to build or to continue moving. And that makes a little bit of friction at the start of the game. Okay. Also, you can battle them if you so choose. So I could have this Duchy warrior battle the Forest Patrol cat. There we go. They would take each other out. Okay. Keep in mind, of course, that the hirelings don't have their own hands, so they could never ambush you or anything like that, but they can still deal hits against you the same way that any warrior would. Okay. Then the Duchy scores some points. Let's imagine that they scored 4 points on their first turn. So they arrive at the 4-point marker, and they would take one of these little control pieces. So you're going to put it at the bottom of your player board right next to the evening step, just as a little reminder. And then, once you finish your turn where you reached the threshold, you get to say, all right, cool. I am taking one of these hirelings and I would like to take the last dynasties. So you choose a hireling that you want to take control of. Then you roll the hireling die. I don't have one, of course, because I don't have the Hireling expansion just yet. So I'm just going to roll one of these and pretend. Okay, I'm going to show you a picture of one of the die faces. It's going to have two different colored pips. There are dark red pips and gold pips. If you are in the lead on the score track, or you're tied for the lead in points, you only count the gold pips. But if you are behind, if you're not in first place, or your score marker is not on the track because you've gone for a coalition or a dominance victory, then you count all the pips, okay? You're either winning and counting only gold, or you're counting all the pips because you're not winning. Then, for each pip that you're counting, you're going to take, in my case, some coins, the control markers, and let's say that I rolled it for a 2. Take 2 control markers and put them on the card, or next to the card. That will signify how many turns you're going to get to hold onto that hireling for. Okay? Now we'll fast forward. On the duchy's next turn, amidst their actions, let's say they wanted to move, battle, build, do some minister actions, at some point on their turn, they can take an action with the last dynasty. They take the action. We're not going to talk about what it does just now. And then at the end of their turn, at the end of evening, so finish over the turns, draw your cards, score a point if you rule the tower, if you're playing on the mountain map, and then you're going to remove a control marker. And that means that you have the hireling for one more turn. Then we skip again. We finish that turn, take another action with the hireling, and then at the end of that following turn, you would give up another token. And then here's the interesting part about playing hirelings with multiple 3 or 4 players. You now have to decide whom you're going to give it to. So the duchy player now has a decision. Do I give it to the riverfolk player or do I give it to the lizard player? Well, let's give it to the lizard cult player. So I hand it over to them, and then they would roll the hireling die, the same die, only because the lizards are not in first place at this time. They get to count the gold and the dark red pips, and maybe now they get it for 3 turns. Heck yeah, so now they have it for a long time. On turns where you might have to lose a hireling because you're giving up the last control marker, but you're also gaining another hireling from the supply. Let's say the duchy reached 8 points, and then they get to take another hireling, but they're also losing the one they already have. Because those are simultaneous effects, they both happen at the end of evening, that player gets to decide the order of resolution. So here's what I would do. If I'm the duchy, I say, well, I got this little thing, I reached 8 points. I am going to take the forest patrol. I'm going to roll for it. Oh man, I only got it for 1 turn. Okay, I'm going to take 1 control marker. And then now I resolve the removal of this one. And now I would decide. That way I get to see how long I'll have this hireling for before I decide whom I'm going to give the other hireling to, because they might have it for, 2, 3, or even 4 turns. And that's how you would pass the hirelings around. And the same goes if you were to reach 12 points, then the last one would come into play. You roll the dice as normal. Okay? There's one way that I can think of where you would actually gain a hireling from the supply, from this track, but then not end up being in the lead. And that would be, for example, actually there's 2 examples I can think of. If you're the Eerie and you arrive at 12 points in your daylight, and then you turmoil and lose a whole bunch of points because of turmoil, then your score marker would be behind someone else's, theoretically. Then you would get to take a hireling from the supply, and you'd get to roll and take the full value of the pips because you're technically not in first place by the time you reach the end of evening. The other example I could think of is if you arrive at 12 points and then battle someone a bunch of times with brutal tactics and give them 3 or 4 points and then put them in the lead. That would be a very strange edge case, but you could do it. All right. Now that you understand the basic premise of how hirelings are obtained and passed along to each player, let's see what some of them actually do. We're only going to talk about the base game 4 factions, hirelings, and we'll start with the Forest Patrol. So as you can see, like we already did, we set up by placing a patrol warrior in each clearing. And then you can see there's some text. Think of this as, as a faction ability. So what it is whenever any patrol warriors are removed, place one of them on this card, not back in the supply. So it kind of functions the same way as field hospitals. So in that example where the moles player battled this cat, it would have actually gone on top of the card. But if ever there were 2 that were removed at the same time, let's say I attacked them and rolled a 2, one of them would go to the card and the other one would just go back into the box or back into the supply. Then, so that's just its passive ability. Then as you can see, there's a little symbol here that says 1 and then a sun. That means that this is an ability that the controller may take once in daylight. So what it says is you may move and then you may battle. Okay? So that means that with this hireling, you could say, all right, well, I'm going to move this cat into here and then I'd like to battle, and I could battle over here. They don't have to be connected. It's 2 separate actions. You could battle, of course, in the destination, but it's basically like when you have this, you may, once in daylight, take that compound action. Or instead of taking the move and then battle, you may place all patrol warriors from this card that have been killed one at a time into any clearing with patrol warriors. So you would be able to say, okay, well, these 2 warriors that have accumulated by people just picking off the lone cats, instead of moving and battling this turn, I'm going to take them and place them all into this clearing. Haha. Now, the moles don't rule that clearing if they don't control the hireling. Okay? So those are the 2 actions that you can take with the promoted Forest Patrol. Very cool. The demoted ability is basically like having field hospitals for yourself. So if I'm controlling this hireling, then maybe I'm the Riverfolk Company. Whenever any of your faction warriors are removed, you may spend a card matching their clearing to place those warriors in a clearing with your faction pieces instead of your supply, like field hospitals. So for example, if I'm the Riverfolk Company right here and someone battles me, I could then discard a mouse card to place that warrior that's been lost right back into that clearing or to any other clearing where I have faction pieces. Like I could put it here if I wanted to because I have a faction piece. All right? Keep in mind, like what I said before about crafted improvements, anytime that something specifies faction warriors, that does not apply to other hirelings you control. So if I control both the last dynasties and feline physicians, and somebody removed one of these little birdies, then I would not be able to use feline physicians to rescue this bird, okay? Hirelings are very isolated in what they can do. In fact, they cannot be forced to do anything. If you have the card False Orders, for example, you would not be able to discard False Orders and force hirelings to move. The only actions that hirelings are ever allowed to take are the actions that you see written on the card. And keep in mind that their warriors are separate from yours entirely. Let's say that, we have the Dynasty right here in this clearing. And I am the controller, I am the underground duchy, and I want to attack these cats. If I say I'm going to attack the cats, and I happened to roll a 3-3, then I don't get to deal 3 hits because of the hirelings. The Underground Duchy initiated that battle, and the Underground Duchy only have 2 warriors. You don't add your hireling warriors to that battle. They're totally separate actions. So I would deal 2 damage to the cats. Of course, one of them would be removed. The other one would go on top of the card. And then because there were 3 cats, they deal 3 hits back to me, and they knock out the duchy and the token that was defended by the warriors, not the hireling, of course. However, the hireling, as we're about to see, can take actions of their own. Let's see what the Last Dynasty's card does. So the setup we saw before is you place 5 Dynasty warriors in a clearing on the map edge. And then the Once in Daylight action is kind of like the decree, where it's very deterministic. Once in Daylight, if no Dynasty warriors are on the map, place all 5 of the Dynasty warriors in any edge clearing and battle there. So if ever they're completely removed, you'd be able to say, okay, my Once in Daylight action is I'm going to put them all right here. There we go. And then I'm going to battle there. Okay? You have to battle. So then I would battle the cats because they're the only valid target, and then remove 1, and there you go. Okay? Keep in mind that hirelings that you control are not considered enemy pieces to you. So therefore, if I had the Mole Warrior here and I'm the Underground Duchy, I can't direct them to attack me, nor am I allowed to attack them because they're not enemy pieces. Battling is only something you can ever do to enemy pieces. Now, let's say that I did have these guys here at the start of my turn, so that first thing doesn't happen because there were Dynasty warriors on the map. Or if they rule their clearing, move all their warriors and then battle with them if able. This is an important concept that when it says if they rule, it really means if you, the controller, rule the clearing. Because hirelings and controllers combine their pieces only for the purposes of rule. So in this case, the hireling would rule the clearing on their own because their controller, the duchy, and their hireling adds up to, I think there's only supposed to be 5 actually, whoops. There's only supposed to be 5, so they would have 6 total pieces for rule. Okay, but let's say that the otters came into here, and there we go, we were contested for rule. Now there's 3 hireling warriors and 1 duchy warrior. Now there's a little bit of an issue because we're tied for rule. The Last Dynasty does not have Lords of the Forest ability by the Eyrie, so they don't rule on ties. Now, nobody rules this clearing. What do? Well, we would see that it says, if they do not rule their clearing, battle there twice. So I would command the Last Dynasties to battle the Riverfolk twice. We battle, take 2 damage, and then battle again, take 3. Cool. Yeah, so just remember that whenever something is a question of if the hireling rules it or if the player rules, you would combine the hireling's warriors with yours for rule. But now, let's go back to that second option. If they rule their clearing, move all their warriors and then battle there if able. So I could move here, and then there's no target, wouldn't have to battle. But if I move here, I would be forced to battle this enemy piece because it belongs to the Riverfolk Company. And of course, I don't really have to roll the dice because it's defenseless. Do I get a point for that? Because my hireling just went and destroyed a token? No. If hirelings ever destroy buildings or tokens, the controller does not get points for them. They are separate in that way. Okay? Now let's look at the demoted version. The demoted version is called Bluebird Nobles, and it gives you a passive global ability, which is that you rule clearings when tied for presence. So it kind of gives you the Lords of the Forest ability as if you were the Eyrie. So that's really nice. Imagine all the factions being able to use this power would make them a lot stronger. And then here's another symbol. So let's compare it to the one we have here. This symbol means once in daylight. So at any point in daylight, you can choose to execute whatever action is written on the card. But this symbol means at the start of birdsong. So it would occur in the same timing window as buying from the Riverfolk Company or activating Saboteurs or Better Burrow Bank. So you, the player, would decide what happens first. But in this case, the controller, that's you score 1 point for every 3 clearings you rule. Very nice. So it's just a static upgrade that incentivizes you to spread out and rule more clearings, kind of like what the Eyrie wanted to do anyway. as well as the Lords of the Forest ability. So that's very nice. And the last one is the Spring Uprising. Its setup is a little bit strange. So as you can see, it says roll, oh, it's very small. Roll the Uprising die twice and place an Uprising warrior in matching clearings. So we only have 5 Uprising warriors. I'm using the Woodland Alliance toast-looking warriors, and the actual ones are going to look like bunny rabbits, which is delightful. And you would roll the Uprising die twice. The Uprising die, it looks exactly like the mob die for the Lord of the Hundreds, but it's green. So you would roll it, and it would be, I don't know, fox. So then you would have to put one of these warriors into fox upon setup. Remember, we're still talking about setup. Then, or actually, let me do that again. You roll twice. So fox and then bunny. So you would then, knowing the 2 results, place 1 in fox and 1 in bunny. Okay? And then that would be how you've set it up. Then, let's go over to the next section. This little symbol, this nondescript meeple with a check mark, this symbol means upon hiring. So when you're given it from another player or when you're taking it from the supply, you would follow the instructions written on the section that's right next to the when hired symbol. If no Uprising warriors are on the map, roll the Uprising die and place an Uprising warrior in a matching clearing. All right, so let's say that they got battled and now I'm given this card. Oh, thank you very much. A completely dead hireling. Well, at least if it's removed from the map, I get to then take it and then roll. Excellent. It rolled mouse. So I would get to take this warrior and decide I'm going to put it right here in this mouse clearing. Then, this is very important. This is where some hireling rules get a bit weird. You can see their global ability is to battle the Uprising. This is something only the enemies of the controller can do. You can't attack your own hireling warrior. To battle the Uprising, the attacker must discard a card matching the battle clearing. Ooh, very tricky. It's almost like outrage. So let's say that the duchy has some very important reason to protect this clearing. They would have to come in here and battle this warrior, but they would first have to discard a mouse card before rolling the die to even have a chance at removing it. So they're very sticky and hard to remove. And they're extremely dangerous because here's what happens at the start of Birdsong. First, you must roll the Uprising die. Everything revolves around the die in this. And if it's mouse, then second, you must remove an Uprising warrior and all enemy pieces from a matching clearing. So because there is a mouse guy, I have the choice to remove all of the pieces from that clearing. So I would remove the Uprising warrior itself and the duchy and anything else that was in that clearing. So it's very powerful, almost like a revolt action. Crazy. But then the second one would be, or you must place an Uprising warrior in a matching clearing. So I have the choice of either blowing that up along with the warrior himself or herself, or placing another Uprising warrior in that mouse clearing, we'll say. And you can basically use this to plant bombs throughout the woodland. But be careful, because if you place it in your own clearing while you're the controller and then hand it off to someone, they then have the opportunity to blow it up once it's under their control. And if someone puts it in your area and then gives it to you, you will have no ability to remove it until it's under someone else's control. It's very, very sticky and rough. But here's an important factor. So remember the requirement that if you want to even battle it to remove it to begin with, you have to discard a card that matches the clearing. If, for example, I control the last dynasties and I come in here, a hireling can never battle the Uprising because hirelings don't have their own hand. So they would not be able to, you can't discard one of your own hand cards to battle the Spring Uprising because their hand is not your hand. Okay, just remember that. But hirelings generally can battle each other, provided that they're not both controlled by the same player. Now let's flip it over and look at the demoted ability, which if you're following the pattern, it's going to have something to do with the Woodland Alliance's ability. and it is called Rabbit Scouts. It used to be Rabbit Hood. I kind of missed that. I thought that was a little bit cute. So its ability is the controller may, as defender in battle, before the roll, you may spend a card matching the battle clearing to use the higher roll and make the attacker use the lower roll, just like guerrilla warfare. Or actually, I think it's called guerrilla war on the faction board. Let me know. So yeah, that means that any faction would have the guerrilla war ability that the Woodland Alliance normally has, which is crazy. So if you just have this ability next to your faction board, everyone's gonna think, oh man, it's gonna be really hard to remove him or her because they could just discard a card and then force me to take the 0 and they would get the 3. So as hard as it is to remove the Woodland Alliance, it can be even harder to remove a faction that has the Rabbit Scouts ability. So that's really cool. All right, and the last hireling that's going to come in the Marauder expansion is it's the Exile. The Exile is based on the Vagabond. So you'll never have the Exile and the Vagabond in the same game with each other. And interestingly, just like the Vagabond, the Exile does not have warriors. It is just a pawn. I actually had to print this one off to show you guys. I think it's so cute. So this is a pawn that, like the Vagabond, is going to inhabit the forest. It's never actually going to ever come into a clearing itself. So the setup for the Exile is you're going to put the Exile pawn, so it's not a warrior, it's a pawn, in any forest and the 3 clubs on here. So I'm going to put, if I'm setting up, I would put the Exile into this forest and take these 3 club items and put them right on top of the Exile's card. So if you're wondering, what are these 3 club-looking things that came in my box? Well, they are associated with this hireling, okay? So that's the setup. Then the passive, I'm gonna put these off to the side. The passive ability is actually something that you can do at any time, even if you don't control this hireling, if it's still in the supply or someone else controls it. The passive ability is anytime on their turn, a player with faction pieces, not hirelings that they control, faction pieces, adjacent to the Exile may place an item from their crafted items box on this card to draw a card and score a point. Very cool. So let's say that the hireling, the Exile, is still in the supply. Nobody has claimed it. If I'm the Underground Duchy, I could craft the hammer. Yay, score 2 points. And then, because it's still anytime on my turn, I could then give the hammer that I just crafted to the Exile. I could put it on the Exile's card. And then, because of that, I would score a point and draw a card. Awesome. Ooh, let's get that next turn. All right. So remember that you can only do this once per turn. I can't craft 3 items and then give all 3 of them. It's once per turn. You can give the Exile an item to score a point and draw a card, but you have to have one of your faction pieces in one of the clearings adjacent to the Exile himself. Okay. Then, what can the Exile do with these items anyway? Well, let's see. Once in daylight. Okay, this is important because the Exile can take a lot of actions, but you must execute them all at once. So once you start taking the actions, you have to go all the way. So of course, it's a once in daylight. Any number of times, you may exhaust 1 item on here, these items here. You may exhaust 1 item on here to move to an adjacent forest, and may exhaust 2 items on here to battle in an adjacent clearing. So what I could do, if I have 4 items right now, I could say, I'm going to move, exhaust the hammer, and then move to this adjacent forest. Then I could say, I'm going to move again. I move to this adjacent forest. And then I exhaust 2 items to battle in an adjacent clearing. I could battle here, here, or here. And we're going to battle the Underground Duchy. Let's see how this works. In battle, you can roll hits up to the number of items. So whether the items are exhausted or they're refreshed, that determines your maximum number of hits. So in battle, you can roll hits up to the number of items here, and for each hit taken, exhaust one item, or remove one if you cannot exhaust any. So we're going to, my backup set of dice, just for such an occasion, we're going to battle the Underground Duchy, and I can deal a maximum of 3 hits because I have 4 items. 3-1, so we remove both of those Duchy warriors and took 1 hit, so we're gonna have to take the hammer, I guess, and remove it from the game. It is gone permanently, does not go back in the supply. Just like if the Lord of the Hundreds or the Vagabond throws away an item, it's just gone, okay? Then, when done, refresh all items here. This is the important part about this hireling, that you have to take all the actions sequentially. You can't take some items, move, and then take some of your normal daylight actions and then continue with the exile. You have to go all at once. Then you just refresh all the items, and then next turn, he will be ready to go and do another one of these big rampages. So kind of like the Vagabond, be careful about giving the exile too many items, because if you're not controlling the bear, it can just roam around and just beat the ever-loving snot out of everything in its path. So it's pretty cool, but pretty scary. And then the other side, the demoted side of the exile, is the Brigand. So that's a very cool one. So this one, unlike the Vagabond that interacts with the forest, now it interacts with the ruins. So the setup is you just place ruin items under the ruins as if the Vagabond were in play. And then here we have 2 actions, 2 separate once in daylight actions. So this card you could actually split up. I could do this action, or both, or one, and then take some regular actions with my faction, and then take the other one in any order. So the first option is a controller. You may take an item from a ruin in a clearing with your faction pieces, and if you took the last item from the ruin, remove it. So if I have faction pieces here, let's say that I'm the Underground Duchy, I could say, all right, I'm going to take an item from inside this ruin. And of course, I would be removing the ruin, taking the item, and putting it into my crafted items box. If you are the Warlord, this is really nice because you're taking an item and you get to put it into your hoard. You're never going to have the Brigand and the Vagabond together, so that's why it only mentions the Lord of the Hundreds. So no Vagabond problem to worry about. Then the other thing is, once in daylight, the controller may exhaust an item in your crafted items box, not the hoard. Lord of the Hundreds cannot do action number 2, so just forget that. So you can exhaust an item in your crafted items box to take a random card from a player with faction pieces in a clearing with your faction pieces. So right now there isn't really one, but imagine that this guy were here. I would be able to have a duchy in the same clearing, exhaust the boot that's on my faction board, to steal a card from the Riverfolk Company's hand. So very cool. The Brigand allows you to have the steal ability of the Thief Vagabond, as well as the explore ability to open up the ruins. But keep in mind, you don't score a point for opening the ruins. You just get the item that you can then use for League of Adventurous Mice if you want, or you could use it with the Brigand's ability to steal a card. And those are the 4 hirelings that come included with the Marauder expansion and their demoted sides. There are 9 other cards, both double-sided, and I will talk about all of those in another video in the future. And there are so many really cool, interesting edge cases with hirelings. We actually don't even have all the answers just yet. We're still working things out with Leader Games. So if you have any questions that I didn't address in this video, that's fine. That's normal. Please put them in the comments. I will gather them up and I will address as many of them as I can in the follow-up Hirelings 2 video, where I'll get to all those weird questions and interactions and talk about the rest of these really amazing, cool hirelings. So I will catch you guys next time.